We have to press and hold until it starts blinking red. Yep. It should resolve the greens. Well, we'll let it come up. Oh, there she is. Yeah. All right. I'm Paul Kokemuller. I'm chair of the City of Groton Planning and Zoning Commission, and like to call our special meeting for Tuesday, June 11th, 2024 to order at 6:34. First item on our agenda is roll call. So I am here, Ms. Bergeron is here, Mr. Boris is here, Mr. Rusk is here, and Mr. Rice is not here, and neither is Mr. Jenkins. So Mrs. Lottrop is here, and Mr. James is here, and I will seat them as members for tonight's meeting. All right. First item of business, and I guess the only one, is a discussion of possible zoning regulation amendments. So.
If anybody needs a hard copy. But the map that we have is the same map that we looked at last time. Nothing was changed on this. So I included this for your reference. So you can be clear about what we're talking about. I don't know why. Should be.
Mine took- Both of these took a long time, blinking red.
I hadn't misunderstood.
Oh, I know what I forgot.
Are you guys all good with your mics?
Yeah, those yellows. I'm still thinking about it.
Yeah, but we are.
Give yourself.
Yeah, so one of us.
Oh, yeah, of course. I think this one. All right, so Leslie, you want to walk us through it?
Sure.
What you distributed?
Let me give a quick introduction. So we've been working on these for a long time. And hopefully we are, I will say, number one, this is absolutely not the final draft. So for anybody who read it, say, oh my God, it's not ready. You're correct. But it has what I think we've agreed to in the past, things that I think we should discuss. And so this is now, we've been so long since the last working copy. I thought it made sense to have a fresh working copy. I copied it off of the internet, so it is. There are a couple of things that are not quite right. But I started with the GC zone that is on the internet and is what is officially the
For
GC zone.
Colleen and Cameron. Currently, all of these areas that are in white here are currently all the GC zone. And what we're proposing is a regulation amendment to break them up into zones by specific characteristics based on our interest in
providing a framework for potential development and keeping within boundaries that were provided to us by feedback from.
So just to add one more thing to that, the way the current general commercial zone regulations are written, you can't, the most dwelling units you can have on any parcel is 2. So we're going to amend those we're talking about amending those regulations to allow more residential development in those areas. And that's kind of the thrust of it.
You also can't have any dwelling units on the first floor. So there are a lot of things that were, I think, well-intentioned when this was adopted. But they didn't have the intended effect. So we're trying to do something that whether it's things are built or not, and we expect that they will, but whether they're built or not, they will give us what we're looking for. So did everybody have a chance to at least look over this? Paul?
Yeah, so I guess questions or comments from people from your review, anybody?
I would just make the comment to the new members, and without patting ourselves on the back too much, we did a lot of work to make sure to fit the reason there's different segregation is because you can see the topography lends itself to different levels of potential zoning in there. So we got a lot of feedback from the public. We had some robust conversations and looking forward to both of your input on that. But I think it's been a great process so far. So just add that before we get back into it.
Okay. Well, so I guess, so I did for additional context, where, there was a housing study that was done for the town of Groton in 2021, and it was updated in 2023, and identified the need for like 6,400 units of housing in 2030 to keep up with the growth in population, as well as, the housing, the average housing size in Groton is dropping, so that, you need more housing units, even if the population doesn't increase significantly, just to accommodate that. So that the need was identified, and it's an opportunity, we think, for the city, because one of the things that we've been trying to redevelop Main Street for years, and there was a study done in 2019, and one of the recommendations coming out of that was the need for residential development within walking distance of Main Street. So that's one of the reasons that we're focused on these areas, because they also lend themselves, besides being largely, in many cases, open, and or underutilized, they are generally within walking distance of Main Street, and there's also a need for the additional housing. So that's, I guess, a little more of the background. Anything else anybody thinks we should do that?
Another reason for the zoning regulation changes that we've been looking at, I have to do with the fact that we had some outdated language, some outdated terms, and Leslie has brought in like best practice language from other parts of Connecticut that we were trying to streamline. So when we talk about this terminology for this use or this, feature, we're using the same terms that everybody else.
I just also add that this change is more in line with the POCD that was adopted for the city. So we're moving towards walkable neighborhoods. So that's another reason why we kind of engage in this particular exercise to make sure that we're creating zoning regions that allow and attract development in the way that we have asked for in the POCD.
And I think we start to go through it. And then if people have comments or you wonder why on earth did we change this or not change that? It might be a good way to start and will certainly lead to more history lessons and explanations of weird words that are in here. So,
Before we begin, I wanted to ask about the intention behind some of the changes. Are we also moving towards more of a form-based vote?
yes,
I know we talked about that before. Yeah, okay. Okay, so just reading from that perspective.
okay. And somebody knows me that.
You must be a civil engineer.
Would you like to explain that to us? Okay, generally, and if anybody is listening to this, a form-based code, there are two general types of zoning. One is use-based and one is form-based. And the initial one is use-based and it's been in place since zoning became legal in 1926. And it's often referred to as use-based or Euclidean zoning because it's Euclid and what, somewhere in the Midwest, I can't.
It was Euclid, Ohio, wasn't it?
I think it's Euclid, Ohio, yeah. This is what happens when we have meetings at night. Much better.
Yeah,
Just not the father of geometry.
It's, right, has nothing, it has nothing to do with Euclidean geometry.
But the town could be named for him.
So it is, and it was based on segregation of uses. So you put manufacturing over here, you put residential over here, you put a school or civic section over here. And it was based upon the idea that of health, safety, and welfare. It was based upon the idea that pig farms next to hospitals are not a good idea. That's just an example, obviously. So that separation of uses became like everything else, the intended consequences worked for a while and then they didn't work so well. And technology improved the way, now you could theoretically have a pig farm next to a hospital and nobody would get bad diseases.
They do in Euclid, Ohio.
Thank you. So what started to be, and it also started to get manipulated in a racial sense. And you've heard the term redlining, I'm sure. Zones were divided, highways were put through, and full neighborhoods, working neighborhoods, particularly for people of color and immigrants. Those neighborhoods were ultimately, it was very common for those to be destroyed, put a highway through, separate completely. You've got poor people, people of color, immigrants on one side, and wealthier, generally speaking, Caucasian people on the other side. And with that came the division of school systems and roadways and sidewalk installations and all kinds of things. There's a great book, if you're interested in reading about it, called The Color of Law by Richard Rothstein. Absolutely fantastic book that shows very clearly and very simply that this is in fact what happened and how it happened. There is a reason that the term other side of the tracks is the other side of the tracks, and it has to do with downwind where they would have, where municipalities would have people live based upon class and race, downwind from factories, downwind from railroads, downwind from highways is where you will find the poor communities to this day. And if you drive 95 down through Bridgeport, they've demolished most of it. But if you drive through Bridgeport and you look toward the water, you will see lots of cleared lots. And that is where some of the poorest places in Bridgeport were. That before they were cleared, it was some of the worst public housing, some of the most heartbreaking places to live. And I grew up in Norwalk, I remember very well what that was like, and you have that in every city. So there are very real reasons, often multiple reasons for why cities have developed the way that they have. Groton has had I find it fascinating because Groton's had a very interesting sense of development because we don't really have a highway that cuts through, it sort of flies over until it lands back on the town property. There is a railroad line, but it's not used very much. Although people are talking about bringing it back, which could be actually a really exciting change, but that's not happening this year, so. And then there is the issue of dealing with larger than life, two in particular, larger than life employers that take up an enormous amount of land and have created giant heat islands within the city that 10, 20 years ago, people weren't talking about. Heat islands would be, on the definition list if it was in a document at all. But it's something that we have to be very concerned about now. It's a very real thing. Every conference I go to, every planning magazine or document that I see has to do with resilience. Sierra spearheaded with our consultant, the resilience plan that we have. It's one, if not the first, it's one of the first in Connecticut. It is what people will be looking to. So we can pat ourselves on the back for that. It's an excellent document.
So the newer way of doing this is form-based. Can you
Yes.
Give us a.
And
Just-
form-based has to do with,
Please.
basically, it's not anti-car, which is what you may hear from some people. What it is it is just not giving primacy to the automobile. It's not all about cars, which is gonna be and has been an interesting discussion in the one municipality in Connecticut that has the reverse parking issue of everywhere else. We in fact don't have enough spaces for all of the cars that insist on coming into the work. There are multiple answers to that problem.
Right.
Moving those forward is,
Challenge.
thank you.
But the housing should help that, right? 'Cause
Yes,
the-
that is absolutely part of the goal, but we are not, we can't guarantee that everybody who lives in housing that gets built based on changes to these regulations will be people that work at EB, people that work at Pfizer. But they may be the support staff in some way, for people that do work there. They may be support staff for somewhere else. They may commute out for work, live here and commute out, and work somewhere that supports the people that work at EB. Or they may just live here and have nothing to do with electric boat or Pfizer. I will not get into a whole thing about fair housing law, unless we get to something that we need it, but happy to discuss it offline with anybody. But form-based code is basically, how do you, I think the easiest way to understand it is, how do you design the space between buildings so that it works for everybody? Yes, it works for cars, but it works for pedestrians, it works for bicyclists, it works for kids, it works for people of all abilities. It works for people in, if it's raining and you can't get across the street as fast as you might if it was a sunny day, or, there are all kinds of scenarios, but how do you make that space answer the public need? Then behind it, behind those walls, we know we have a need for housing. So we want to be able to allow for more than two dwelling units per parcel, which is, if you look at the parcel divisions in the GC zone, some of them are huge and some of them are small. There's a more rational way to make those judgments, like what can the land hold? We know that we deal with public sewer, public water. We don't have those battles to deal with, so that in some places where you don't have public sewer, where you're dependent on septic, you can only at best build to what the land carrying capacity of the land is. Well, how big a septic system can you fit? And that'll tell you how many bedrooms you can have. So the other thing is, we don't want to be so prescriptive that we say the building has to be pink and it has to have porches that have, you know, filigreed fronts and, you know, we don't want to be so clear, because if you have someplace where everything looks the same, it's no longer a thing. You don't have special places, you don't have the things that stand out as something really unique and special. An example of that is something called, if you look down the street and you see, the photograph that's often shown for this is looking down the street in Burlington, Vermont at the steeple. They changed a roadway into a pedestrian mall, which is uncovered, but they closed it to traffic for the most part. And you look down and you see at the end, you see a church and a steeple, and it's a really beautiful ending to, and sort of encloses that space, which is several blocks long. And it's called a terminating vista. There will not be a test at the end. But what that terminating vista does is it gives you a landmark, it gives you a place that says, this encloses the rest of this. If you didn't have it, you would just have these blocks that go on forever. And so it's creating the spaces that people feel comfortable in at a human scale. I'll stop there.
Okay. Thank you for that. So, let's start walking us through what you prepared.
Good TED talk.
Thank you. Okay, so when you get to page 3, basically what I did was I removed section 4.3 of the existing regulations, which is the GC zone, and said we'll keep this for something else. This thing has been jiggered and rejiggered in so many ways, so many times. And to be honest, I have to do these things sort of beginning to end all at once to keep it all straight in my head. So we have several different districts now created or proposed to be created. And let me just go over them quickly. In a couple of places, we're keeping the existing GC zone. But if you start at Thames Street, over by the river, on the left-hand side of the map, the piece that goes up the west side of Thames Street and curves around a little bit along Bridge Street, that curve. The height limit, first of all, this is adding residential uses to these areas. Okay, so we're not at the 2 dwelling parcels.
So, yeah, so we're gonna actually rename these as GCR, which is general, commercial, and residential.
Yes.
That's
And then the numbers are. Look, we can call these anything anybody wants, but the numbers relate to the maximum number of feet allowed. And what that translates into is 50 feet. You can put a 4-story building into a 50-foot height. Okay, doesn't mean you have to, doesn't mean you have to get to 50 feet. Doesn't mean it has to be 4 stories. You will see in the chart later on that there are some required minimums, and that's to keep the scale on that street, that interstitial space between the two facades. To keep that at a scale that is where people don't feel like they're lopsided when they're walking down the street. So that's a maximum of 4 stories. The eastern piece of that is a maximum of 2 stories. That's tucked right into that sort of cliff that comes down from the back of the Church Street properties. Okay, so Church Street, nothing happens to the Church Street properties, they don't change. But it allows them to look over, and it's kind of, you'd have to build a pretty big building or build very close and up to block the view of the bridge from that point, so. And I should say, view corridors are not protected in Connecticut, with very few exceptions. We are not one of those exceptions. Okay, so going around that 2-story area curves around the that pretty major drop off and comes back up North Street. It cuts right at North Street, but that triangle at North Street and Bridge is also, I realize the blue lines they're not quite matching, but just to be clear, that's also limited to 2 stories.
So that's, that would still be GC 35,
Yes,
or would you want to put, do you want to just GC, because in the GC zone, it's already 35 feet, correct? So
Correct.
should that triangle be just GC, or do you, or is it?
I think there is a possibility, when I was thinking about what could go there and what would be. You know, I could see somebody putting a coffee shop in there with a couple of apartments above.
Okay.
And it would not necessarily.
Well, I think there's a business with the potential residents above right now. The place that used to be a barber shop,
Mhm. So,
but even so, there's not a lot of space there to add more than 2 dwelling units.
which you couldn't do anyway. I think there's room to add more than 2, but I think you'd have to merge all the properties. You'd have to.
Well, all you have in that triangle is there's a strip that's owned by the state adjacent to the 4-way intersection. And 2 other parcels essentially. So there's not a lot of room there for, major development.
Correct.
So it's academic, Paul. I don't.
Right, yeah, I mean, if we say it's GCR 35, that doesn't hurt anything.
Right.
You can still put a purely commercial use in there.
Yeah.
It just gives the opportunity for somebody to do something as Jason just suggested.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
So that's that. And if you go across Bridge Street, like across from where Norm's is, that strip, it's GCR 50.75, is where it would allow up to a minimum of 2 stories, but up to 4 stories at the street level. But then you could go down 2 extra stories in the back where the land drops off in the rear. So you could get a total of 6 stories in the back, potentially. But what would be facing the street would be consistent up and down the street there. And then moving further up Bridge Street, GCR 75 would be up to 6 stories. again, a two-story minimum. And that space is where Outer Lights is. And so those are large, those are large spaces. They could hold larger buildings. There is almost no residential in that area. And there are two, the roller rink was just demolished, and further up the hill as you cross over the railroad tracks is where there's a two-story, I guess it's a motel.
Up on the hill.
Yeah, so which is pretty hidden away. And we could get some bulk in there. Not unlike the apartments on the other side. Where you know they're there because you can sort of see some of them, but you don't really know how far back it goes. And unless you take yourself on a field trip back there, you don't know how far it goes. I don't know how many people live here. And it's not detrimental to anyone.
And those locations are also close to the highway too,
Yes.
so on and off the 95 is pretty straightforward.
There'll be very few things that don't have at least 3 reasons for doing them. So. And then if we go up North Street, there is currently multifamily housing on the corner of Broad and North. We're gonna leave that little square on the west side of North Street. As GC, leave it as it is. And then if somebody is interested in doing something different or creative, we can entertain changes at that point, but right now it's functioning fine. And one of the things we're trying really hard not to do is to make things not conforming. That makes it really difficult to finance or refinance a building, so. And then where it says OS is for open space, we have an open space zone already. We're gonna rezone this area as open space. It's basically wetlands right now. There are no buildings there, so it's just protecting that space.
It's property of the town.
Correct.
Those two
Don't
parcels
let it-
are owned by the town.
Across the street from that, there's a Mexican restaurant, there's a liquor store, a few other sort of small scale buildings. But if you look at those buildings, you can imagine a second story on there that could actually help create a space there at some point. And so the idea is to allow that opportunity. So that site is GC. Correct.
And not residential. Just,
It's got the 2 dwelling limit.
oh, okay.
Right, it remains as it is right now.
Yeah,
Allows up to 2 dwellings, so if they raised the roof, they could put 2 dwelling units above a restaurant or a store or something. But like Leslie said, no change to that zone where if they decided to go and make improvements to the building, it wouldn't suddenly be non-conforming to the zone.
if it becomes non-conforming, the earth doesn't start spinning in the other direction. People they absolutely do not have to change anything about their property. They end up with what's called a pre-existing non-conforming. Which people think you're really smart when you can say that and it comes out right the first time. So there are protections for people in terms of what they can do and don't, nobody's gonna go and say you have to take down the top story. But again, the biggest hardship becomes the financing issue. If you have a non-conforming lot and generally can't make it more non-conforming. So.
Are there any difference in planned uses for GCR versus GC? Like, is it just looking to change the size of the buildings or also the uses allowed?
We are absolutely looking at uses. One of the issues that we have all over town is that there are applications to amend the text of the zoning regulations have changed. And a couple of meetings ago, there's a gentleman who came in and he wanted to add sale making as an allowed use in the GC zone. That's how the city has kind of operated with uses for a very long time. That's not generally how it's done. And one of the things about form-based code is that you try not to get so specific with the uses, because what you want to do is be able to keep the buildings. Have, you know, when you're meeting with people who are going to build buildings, you suggest that they build, they develop a structural grid for their buildings so that things can be changed, and architects will usually keep this in mind, but you'd be surprised how many times we get developers in to come meet with us who have not brought their architect or don't have an architect or whatever. It's all fine. We work it all out, but letting people know that you want your plumbing chases, you want to have your, where you're putting your electrical in, keeping that so that you can change the size of rooms or units over time, make them bigger or make them smaller, so that you don't have to look at tearing down buildings all the time and rebuilding something new. You can actually develop buildings that are flexible. Some of that is just sort of the behind the scenes conversations that Sierra and I will have with developers when they come in. And so we want to be able to keep doing that so that the uses are less, it's not that they're unimportant, but they're less important than whether or not you can actually do them. So, and I have some great examples.
And the approach that we have been taking on this was to add the ability to put in mixed use buildings, so a mix of commercial and residential only buildings. And add those to the uses in the already existing in the commercial district.
Yeah.
We weren't actually taking anything off of that list, other than maybe some wording changes that, like the one that limited it, 2 dwelling units per parcel, for example, will be, was something we talked about changing. But in general, we were gonna just add residential to the uses that were allowed in the commercial zone. That is the approach we take.
And the other thing that, and I can send this to you. The other way to look at uses is by how much space they take up, on the theory that sort of gives you an idea of their intensity within an area. There are sort of typical divisions of space, like retail space, for instance. You can have a small mom and pop store that would fit under the rubric of retail space of, under 5,000 square feet. Then you can have one that is retail space between, 5,000 square feet and 10,000 or 15,000. And then anything above that. The way that when I've written these regulations before in other places, basically that sort of comes in at the smallest level you can have by, site plan, and you don't need a public hearing or just a zoning permit if there's, depending upon what's around the area. Second level would be site plan. You want to make sure that, people have enough room to put their parking, talk about parking in a while. And then if you want to build, if somebody comes in and says, I want to build a big box store, they have to come in and have, that requires a special permit if it's over, 15 or 20,000. And that breakdown into sort of three groups is pretty typical. And what it does is it doesn't say what kind of retail, so you're not getting into that nitty gritty, you really are looking at the land use and what the impact on the land use is. So you really are looking at, when you get a traffic study from the applicant, you're looking at the traffic study in terms of the impact on that, and it could change by use. If you're looking at it in terms of where the parking is. Okay, one of the things about that outdoor room is that you want to try and keep the parking in the back as much as possible. On-street parking can be great in retail areas or commercial areas. One of the things that we've talked about and the term that we have thrown around is trying to create sort of a Groton Main Street on Bridge Street. So looking at some of that area now, it takes a lot of things to do that, including things that we don't have jurisdiction over, like the width of the roadway, the width of the lanes, and put a median in. But we're smart. We're doing a tactical urbanism installation to show people what it could be like. Actually, I'll let Sierra talk about it a little bit. Sorry, I took you off guard.
No, for Bridge Street Gateway, there is a tactical urbanism demonstration to look at the pedestrian crossings, the car movements, and just like on sidewalk widths. This is also associated with the state's plans. They have plans to redo the shared use path on the Gold Star Bridge and how that actually connects into our proposed area. They currently are proposing a roundabout in the intersection, so our tactical urbanism wouldn't necessarily test that out, but it will start to test out certain elements that will lead us to an installation that they may be doing within the next years.
So that was, thank you, excellent. The other thing to consider is that was all about the automobile. Getting back to trying to make the area more pedestrian and bicycle friendly. How do you start to work at massaging the roadway and getting people to sign on to believe that yes, narrower lanes are safer, they're slower, you get more throughput, blah, 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 blah. All of those things, being able to get people to cross a street more safely and have an area of refuge to be able to stop, like a median in the middle of the street. So there's a place to stop in case you can't cross all the way. Anyone who has tried to cross a street that wide with 2 kids, a stroller, and a couple of bags of groceries know that you do that once. And then after that, you pile your kids into the car on one side, you drive across the street to park on the other side. And that, I think we can all agree, while it is completely logical given the actual circumstances, shouldn't be the way what the logic dictates. We can do better than that.
So are we, when we're gonna we're rewriting and updating the regulations, are we gonna go through the list of permitted uses and update that and refine it to be more like the newer approach, or are we gonna leave this list of all kinds of?
That's a really good question. And what I think I'd like to do is for us to go through all of this. We don't have to do everything all at once. And if we find that it makes sense to get these zones in, get the residential, get the heights established, minimum heights, maximum heights, and other sort of form-based basics like parking in the back, making sure that we have enough of the front setback so that there's room for cafe tables and chairs so people can meet outside. Or whatever, there are whole bunch of smaller things in here. As we go through this, let's look with an eye toward that. I'm happy to do it either way. I think that the sooner we can get something that allows developers to start planning and putting in applications so that they know what's coming. One of the biggest problems with zoning regulations is that developers really look for predictability. And right now we've been doing a lot of really good work, but they're not seeing us as highly predictable at the moment, even though we know what the end game is that we want, where we want to be.
I would just say that as we're going through, I think if anybody has an idea about changing language or combining terms, then we should do it now.
Yeah.
Because we're not gonna have a whole lot of opportunities to, we're looking at, we want to get this going so we can get on to the next zone and start improving the regulations there. So I would say that we'd want to leave less for a future effort than, we want to get it done now with an eye toward keeping momentum.
Great, this has been 9-dimensional chess game I have going in my head right now. There are like 4 or 5 others sitting on my desk.
Yeah.
Previous.
So what we have in front of us is the existing GC regulation by and large.
Yep.
Except where there is red ink.
Which is with crossouts and additions, correct?
So I got to go, sorry. So I mean, one thing that I noticed is that we haven't really defined a purpose or permitted uses in the GCR zone anywhere here.
Yeah.
Is that something that we should do? And because we're establishing them as, as a separate zone, so seems to me like we should put what the purpose is, which is, similar to the commercial zone, but with also residential added to that. And then, at least adding the mixed use and multifamily dwelling as permitted uses in the
Yeah.
GCR zone, right? That's.
I think that
I would be comfortable with instead of having us rehash what we've been talking about for a while now and spend a lot of time on a mission statement under purpose, I would be comfortable with Leslie adding some verbiage that we could look at next week.
Absolutely.
Just enhance the, we're wedged in words like, increased residential and mixed use. And I think that'll need it.
No, I agree. I just brought it up as something that.
Oh, I agree.
I think we need to get it down, okay?
so happy written, I just.
On page 4,
Yep,
where you crossed out temporary or special events permitted subject to approval of staff. So is there still going to be a need for approval for temporary ones? Is that somewhere else that I missed it?
it takes, it allows them, there will be.
The new red letters would be underlined there. Permit by commission or city planner in consultation with commission chairperson. So either it comes to the whole, this is what we talked about.
On page 4.
9 months ago.
The under cultural, historic and memorial?
No, I thought you were looking at 4.6 on point B.
No, I'm looking
Oh, you're
at
gonna, okay, so.
You're in C.
4.36.
Okay. The cultural and stuff, memorial circle.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so if you go back up to the header, 4.6 Charlie, principal use is permitted by site plan approval, commission or city planner. Anything under that header can be approved by the city planner.
That's where
Okay,
the temporary or special
Alright.
events go moved to there.
Welcome to the chess game.
anybody else?
Other comments on these sections that were on page 4, page 5?
Page 5.
Shoot.
Halfway, well, a little more than halfway down, a boatyard for building, storing and repairing. I see crossed out fire trucks and put emergency vehicles. I know what you're thinking, but should we add all emergency vehicles?
I'm not seeing what you're seeing.
Oh, it's page six.
Well, this is page 5.
I don't know, it's
There's
printed
different-
differently.
Yeah, there's different pagination.
Okay,
Sorry, I don't know.
Okay,
So
on
it's
page 6, I'm with you.
okay. I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, so you asked if it should be all emergency vehicles?
Yeah, just so that nobody questions. That's, just takes the assumption that, oh, they're only talking about ambulances or.
Oh, one of the reasons I put emergency vehicles is so that it's not just about fire trucks.
Yes.
Emergency vehicles is the all-encompassing
You
term of
know
art.
that, because that's the way you wrote it. But
Well-
if someone else were to come in and read emergency vehicles, you want to make sure they know all fire trucks, ambulances, everything.
I think emergency vehicle is plain enough language to include
Okay.
ambulance and
Yeah.
fire and police and.
It is the term of art for the everything but a sky. Oh,
I'm not dying.
When a developer or an engineer would say that word, they mean the generalized, like adequate means for emergency vehicle is a standard width and dimension. So that's.
But these are being written for the general public. So you want to make sure that.
it's also being written for a judge.
They have to go in front of legislature first.
She can explain to them.
Yeah.
They should be very grateful.
I do have a question. It's not about a red lines thing.
It's okay.
But on page 4, I find it interesting. Is there any specific reason a licensed medical marijuana dispensary can be given as a site plan? But retail sale of alcoholic liquor is special permit? Is there any particular reason that they're separated?
This falls into the category of, I didn't write that part.
This is
That
existing.
decision. This
in
is
the GC
existing.
right now.
I see. Okay.
And there's some things that it's a very good question. I think it is worthy of a serious conversation. Right now, the way the state is working, there are only a certain number of permits they give out. And the permit for this area is taken by a location in the town, so we couldn't even get one within the city. And I'll be perfectly honest with you, taking on all of this and taking that on, okay, let's just let that one rest for now. And if it comes back as a, as the gentleman who was, there was a gentleman here a few meetings ago who was considering putting in a hookah lounge, he never came back, but he wanted to have a discussion with the commission, which was great. We don't have regulations on hookah lounges, which is why he would have had to go through an additional process. So we're doing this balancing act of being thorough, but also trying to get things done in a way that is as smooth as possible, that people can come back and we can juggle things if we need to at a later date.
But from a, sort of a practical perspective, it would seem that a licensed medical marijuana dispensary would really be closer to the retail sale of alcohol.
I did bring it up.
Of alcohol and liquor.
I did bring up, I know that there are other towns that have allowed both, but they put them under the same requirements, so that's why I bring it up. I think it's interesting that they're under 2 different requirements here.
I'm at your service.
Could we move retail sale of alcoholic liquor to the same heading as the medical marijuana and also add the word license? And that way that takes care of the state giving out permits and things like that.
License to You want to add that to alcohol?
Are they, I think permitted is the right word for alcohol,
Okay,
but,
no,
tell me again, I,
I would move the
Yeah.
licensed medical marijuana dispensary to 4-6 Delta.
Yeah, it's been a site plan and special permit. And that,
one of these days, there's gonna be some wacko symbol in what you read. I don't know, what Jason said, I didn't understand. It's me.
okay, so we just move that down and they're in the same place.
all right,
Good observation.
other comments? Unless there's anything else you want to say about,
I just want to be really sure that I have this right. So we're moving number 2 under 3.6C
Yes.
to 6.5. Oh, remember it, but between 6 and 7.
Mhm.
Great. Thank you.
other comments? How about, anything else under 4.6.b? There were a few edits in there, but not.
Yeah.
And we added the automotive paint protection establishment that was added. A while back.
Yeah.
And. I mean, is single family dwelling, is that a new addition there, or is that something that's been?
That came
Was it-
from the former director of Riverfront. Riverwalk, I can't remember. Yes. That came in as a request, I think it was 2 years ago. Because they were trying to sell a building and it was a duplex, but they wanted to be able to have somebody come in and buy it and change it into a single family. Dwelling units is not allowed, was not allowed in the GC zone. So that's where that came from. It's a pretty quick item.
So single family dwelling then would apply to all the GC variant zones that we're talking about. These are baseline regulations that are the same for all of them. And then I think we'll have a couple of, specific things related to mostly building height that will be unique to the GCR 50, GCR 50.75.
But this is just this is to avoid making somebody,
It was to
Right.
enable a use that was not allowed in the GC zone. That wasn't, sort of fell into that, okay, I sort of understand why they tried to do it, they were trying to build places for business, but it didn't really make sense that you could have a duplex, but not a single.
okay,
And not a 3-story or more. It's like you could only,
And kind of along those lines, the automotive paint protection establishment is very specific. Is there a term that we want, that we could use to make that a little bit broader? Like, are we wanting to allow car repair?
at some, we can do that now. And at some point, I mean, I'm loving how you're thinking. The answer is yes, it came in about 3 years ago, very specific to a very specific use. That's where you can see, that's where we have issues, like somebody wants to come in and do something that is sort of like it, but not quite like it.
I don't know why it wouldn't fall under 4.6.delta 4.
repeat that.
Back on your page 4.
Right.
Okay, gasoline stations, motor vehicle dealerships, motor vehicle repair,
Yeah.
inter service garages, and other similar automotive uses.
Right.
Yeah.
I agree.
That was an interesting case with that. Yeah, they had to come in. It was formerly a retail place, but because of the use and there was previously suspected to be a connection with advanced improvements. So the applicant had to show that they, one, were not the same person that was going to take potentially a detailing business that was at Advanced Improvements and move it to another location where it's still not permitted in the same zone, so there was a concern at that time. Am I understanding? Sorry.
Yeah.
Basically, the bottom line is that, the reason that so many of these are so specific, painfully specific, is because metrics were used to decide whether it was a good idea or not for reasons that were not necessarily related to land use entirely. They were not, there was nothing illegal about it, there was nothing about, but it was. It's a small city, and so you end up with comments about so and so and so and so.
Yeah, but we can't make the regulations pertain to a particular user, you know.
Totally agree.
What was wrong with the idea of auto detailing that wouldn't fall under general automotive uses?
There was a concern expressed at public hearings about auto detailing being done in an area where it was not permitted. And so there was but I mean, I think that actually a simple fix to this would just be to add the automotive paint protection establishment to the gasoline stations list.
I'm with you, I just don't know where the restriction on auto detailing comes from.
I think the statement other similar automotive uses would cover that.
You would think, I mean, but then we've got the statement about subject, I mean, is defined by state statute.
Okay,
Which is a, so.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure, I doubt that automotive paint protections,
Yep,
so anyway, again, not to make somebody not conforming, but there was a lot of there was a lot of discussion about that. And it seemed the best way to proceed.
The other thing, if I'm not mistaken, the city of Groton's kind of practice historically has been if it wasn't specifically listed within our regulations,
I know.
it wasn't
Right.
allowed. So that's kind of when we started getting all these kind of one-off additions, but
Which is what we're trying to move away from,
exactly.
you know?
Yep.
4.6 point delta, 1 retail, 2 public building, 3, and then, so if you want to sell left-handed pickleball paddles. You can do it. Tomorrow you want retail, you can do it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Just reconvert that building.
There was a time when people had to come before the commission if they wanted to take a building and use it for a different permitted use in
Yeah.
that zone. They had to
Same.
come get- So, we allowed Leslie to make that, or the city planner to make those decisions. But at one time, it was at the government commission.
So does it make sense then to move automotive paint protection to number 4? And just put it in.
I can say just,
So 4.6D4.
Still a weirdly specific clause added to a
Very general.
very general.
The other big question about it too was use of water, like the
There was
capacity of
that,
the
there
use.
was runoff and
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of it. had
Not
to do
something
with-
we're,
Right.
A lot of it had to do with noise that was across the street from people's houses.
Yeah.
a special permit though, I mean, we get a cut on it, and there are lots of other factors that we don't get a cut on that are related to that. You know what I mean?
Yeah, oh no, it's a. It was
Unless it's
surprisingly difficult to get that approved.
No, I remember, I mean, I was on economic development. I remember
We gave them an award for it, yeah.
It could be worse, Jason. It could specify the color.
I know.
So here's my idea.
They did a nice job.
they did, and they're interested, they come in and talk about doing other projects and stuff, so. Yeah, If you remember what it looked like before.
Yeah, didn't have enough parking either. Okay, how about, so we're through 4.6 D?
Yep.
How about 4.6 E? There's some wording changes in there, but. Anything significant there, Leslie?
Security guards is like, it's like the swap from fire trucks to emergency vehicles. Make up the gender bias and make it a more general term that conveys.
Makes sense. Okay, so that was 4.6
Can I ask this maybe question towards you with the microbrewery? Are we not, where are we?
I actually have questions about that.
Okay.
I don't know all the history on it, so we.
How did this get in as an accessory building?
See all the stuff in black?
Yeah,
I didn't
was
do that.
there, I
I didn't do that.
I guess it was a rhetorical question.
I love it, I don't.
But yeah, my only thought there is that we are sticking with the current boundaries, boundary language, 3,000 square foot, 10,000 barrels. Which would put a cap on existing businesses.
That's what those are regulated, that's regulated by the state. So these numbers are consistent with the state. One of the things you could do is to take out the numbers and just put a comment not to exceed state regulations, unless there's a reason that you want to be sure that you keep that down. Keeping in mind that this is alcohol that's being produced, not imbibed.
Which falls under,
Not to exceed.
yeah, I would be more comfortable taking out language that makes it sound like this commission is dictating the terms. And again, it's, well, at least in 4.6 Delta, it's subject to commission review.
I look at it as if the state ever changes it, we don't have to go back and change it.
Indeed,
Yeah.
exactly.
It's a breathable document.
Right.
It's a great term.
So is the 3,000 square feet of floor area for production, is that in the state statute? Is that-
I think all of this came from the state. I will have to pull it up. Again,
I may just be, it'd be worth looking to see if there's anything in there. But it's, I'm certainly in agreement that, just say it. Referencing the state statute and be done with it. And I also see why now I'm reading it more carefully, why it's repeated essentially in 4.6 and that's because, that's just an accessory use to a restaurant or drinking establishment rather than a standalone use.
So, well, I have a question about that, because subclause A of number 5 in 4.6 says that such use shall only be authorized through special permit approval and site plan approval. So there's actually no difference between what's written in 5 and what's written in 20. Because the A states that it needs to go through the same process that 20 is. So I don't know why it's separated between those two sections.
I think
Well,
it was separated as a different use rather than as a standalone versus what do we call this? It's accessory use, correct? So is that the
what you-
distinction that we need
yeah.
to make?
Do you need to make it? I don't know, let's talk it out. It's interesting for me to hear some of the history on it, because it was one of the first things I saw when I first looked at the regulations. There's a story to this, but I don't know what it is.
Well, the story to it, I mean, so the rest of the backstory is that when they originally applied, they had to go on they had to go on the industrial zone. So that's how they ended up where they are. Because that was zoned industrial at the time. it's GC now, but it wasn't at the time, so they couldn't occupy a building on, say, Main Street. They had to go back to the, where you might have liked to have it.
Yeah.
But that's how it got there.
But just from looking at this document, 46C is site plan. 46D is special permit, which involves public hearing.
Right.
46E is kind of resetting back to the least restrictive. Go ahead, build your outbuildings as long as it follows these criteria. With the exception of if you're using your accessory building for a distillery, it's got to be approved through site plan, so a special permit.
I think you could take 5 from 4.6.e and put it into 20, or 4.6.d, and just say microbrewery, distillery, winery as a principal use, provided that, and also, or as a principal use and also as an accessory use in apartment to a restaurant or drinking establishment. Because that would say the exact same thing that it says now, and we can get rid of, you could delete subsection A from that.
Or wrap subsection A into number 5 and get rid of the rest of it.
Well, I don't even think, because I like, you should move 5 to 20, because that's already under special permit approval and site plan.
Okay.
But that's for principal uses.
So what I'm saying is you should switch that to be winery as a principal use and also as an accessory use to restaurants and drinking establishments.
Did you catch it all?
That's our pleasant.
It's a lot of,
Yep.
a lot of moving parts there.
So that is so 5A is gonna go under 20.
So I think you should delete 5A and move 5 and all of the other subsections into 20.
Most of them are repeats.
Yeah.
They're all repeats.
Mostly the same.
It says the exact same thing.
So so what you'd be doing is adding just the concept of this being principal use, also as accessory use.
Yeah.
And then you'd be able to, at least save that one tree. One tree.
Any confusion that it may cause with somebody looking like, well, it's the same thing in 20, same thing in 5.
Well, just like me.
Yeah.
So we're gonna take 5 out completely in the accessory,
Just move the accessory
Yeah.
use.
which is fine. One of the things that also goes with looking at uses as accessory and primary is that you can, let's say there was a restaurant on a site and they wanted to build an outbuilding in the back or an addition and put in a distillery of some sort. You can have more than one special permit use on a parcel, it just has to be approved. And the distinction between primary and accessory uses is the primary use is usually the bigger use. It's the one that you will judge your parking on primarily. It's where the use goes on the property and where that building is it in front or does it need to be in the back? We'll talk about that more, I guess, toward the end. But, and an accessory use is sort of you could do with it or without it. It takes that minor role, but it doesn't mean that it's minor to the business
No,
necessarily.
The only thing I'd say about that is that we make sure that number 20 remains the last in the list of primary use. Since it's also going to mention accessory, and accessory is the next section. That way there's,
Great idea.
we're not teeing somebody up for a failure here by,
Flows right in.
Yeah.
yeah.
So if somebody wanted to have an accessory building on a lot where there's a restaurant, for the restaurant to use that alcohol, that would still fit under principal use.
Accessory buildings are different from accessory uses.
So wouldn't we want to keep that in the accessory building?
You will be judging buildings differently than you will be judging uses.
And I think the only difference is that we have the ability to limit the hours to the same as the principal use, which means to the restaurant. So I don't know, I could go with it.
And then and then the question is, do you want to allow people to go and, check on whether the yeast in the brewery is doing whatever it's supposed to do? Or not at 11:30 instead of 10:55 before everything closes after that.
So if somebody's gonna have that distillery in a separate building, would they apply under principal use permit?
Well, we're adding a clause to number 20 that says also applies to accessory.
All right, as long as there's something in there that.
Well, the way it's currently written out, it's written as an accessory use. To a restaurant or drinking establishment. So, I mean, we could just take that language and plug it into this guy. We could, I mean, I'd take that whole statement and plug it into, like, that,
5.
or as an accessory
Five,
use to a
four.
restaurant or drinking establishment.
What you're looking for is after microbrewery, distillery, winery as a principal use. Insert parenthetical phrase, or as an accessory to a restaurant or drinking establishment.
Yeah.
And then that just moves all that over.
Yeah.
Restaurant or drinking establishment.
Yeah, just as a principal use. And then in parentheses, or, and then use your language from 5 as an accessory use to a restaurant or drinking establishment. In parentheses. Provided that.
It's gonna be fun tomorrow. Okay, great.
All right, anything else in 4.6.E?
We're leaving 6.
What's that?
We're leaving 6. That's the temporary.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, 4.6.E, that's what we're,
And the last one is number 6.
oh, the last use, yeah,
Yes.
well, that's the
That's the temporary outdoor
temporary
events.
outdoor events thing again. Is that a?
But also get rid of the word and.
And provided, yeah.
Subject approval by city planner and police department provided.
Yeah.
I don't want to get rid of that, but it just gets really weird if the and
I agree.
provided is there without that.
Okay.
All right. We're good there? Okay, 4.6.F. So this is gone.
This is gone. There's a complete replacement of bulk regulations. In some places, like at the bottom of page 9, underneath that part. That, which I don't know what page you're on. 4.6.F. There's a chart where everything is crossed out. Yeah. Okay, at the bottom of that, it says private frontages. Yep. That comment relates to the part of the page, so that they're on. Okay. And these might end up in the definition section more appropriately. But I wanted to make sure that you had an idea of what these terms meant, and you could see how it relates to where buildings are and what the front configuration of them are. The if you look at this diagram, that's what everybody else, the light blue line all the way on the right is the street. So it shows street trees with some configuration, with some front of the building configurations. In this case, you would require street trees. In some, they might not be required. And again, everything is, with a site plan, is so site specific. You know, is there room to put a tree belt for a tree that will be big enough to actually let the tree live? And a sidewalk and a whatever. So these are as much options as they are anything. You can specify.
So these would not necessarily be requirements. You'd have to, would you have to pick one of these that,
Not necessarily, but you could pick.
okay, so these are,
Somebody could come in with and say, I'm not using any of these options. I want to use I would like to use the pickleball frontage mechanism. And they could show you what that meant, because none of us will know. And you'd say, that would be great for this site. Okay. If you don't like that for some reason, if it's not working and it gives the commission something to choose from if you're looking, if you need to.
So, but would we want to put this under optional frontages? And then would we want to add a clause that says if you want to use a different frontage, it needs to be approved? And then we would want,
I'm gonna do that.
it just depends on how much we want people to adhere to this. I think this is a really good, it's really good. I mean, it gives people an idea of what we want the street to look like, and it would give consistency to all the buildings, even though they're different. So I think that follows the purpose and the goals that you guys set. But it's just depending on whether it's a suggestion or whether it's something we expect people to follow.
Right, this should be labeled examples,
Okay,
you know, and this should be the regulation that we're holding to, or at least basis of, you know. You know what I mean, setback and things is I think that when we're specifying 24 feet, that's where you start before you.
which doesn't actually look like it matches these pictures necessarily, that 24 feet.
That is entirely.
Confusing it a little bit. Okay. I mean, I think the 24 feet in some places would make sense, but in other places it might not, given that we want people to feel like there's that outdoor room, right, with the walls and your edges. If you're 24 feet away from, because often the sidewalk is right next to the roadway, and sometimes there's even more right of way. And then there's, that would be where the property line starts, then adding 24 feet. You could be pretty far away from the roadway. And in some places that might make sense, but if we're trying to create that downtown atmosphere, we might want to require a little bit closer.
Yeah. So I think the goal is to. Some of it's gonna depend on what someone is building. So for instance, if they're building an apartment building that's only apartments, it doesn't have. It's not designed for mixed use, you know, more glass on the bottom level, for instance. You might want that a little bit further away to allow for some uses either in the front or
Table.
not used, or benches or something that is also will give, particularly that first level, some privacy from the roadway.
Yeah, and that 24 feet, I picked that just because I saw the number, but that's in the GC. You know, and so in the other zones that we're creating, it's 6 to 18 or something.
A little closer.
I have a question about that actually. So we mentioned that that Mexican restaurant Ortega's is in GC. That's not, is that 24 inches, is that 24 feet off? Is that frontage 24 feet? Which would mean that's non-conforming now, because this is a minimum requirement.
It may be 24 feet from the roadway.
Yeah, I don't know
Okay.
where that property line actually is.
Sure. I just wasn't sure if that parking was part of the right of way, because the sidewalk is on the other side of that parking, so I just wasn't sure. It's right on.
I'm
the-
guessing it's not conforming in so many ways that.
But they would have a pre-existing non-conformance.
I know, but I think we had discussed previously that we
You're
didn't
smart.
want these sort of pre-existing non-conformities to exist.
Yeah, we can look into that.
I think leaving people room to, if they are doing an apartment building, having benches, things like that makes sense. But there's no requirement against that. There's no maximum setback. So if they wanted that extra setback, they can use it. It's just requiring the minimum that becomes a problem, right?
But we have some maximums stated here, 18 feet, 24 feet, depending on which zone.
We don't have maximums in the GC though.
No, I like that.
Well, I mean, the other thing we don't wanna, you don't wanna have something in the you don't really wanna encourage the parking in front, right?
But
Right.
that's under the parking.
Yeah, and there's that, and that is,
So we're not going to be worried about setback allowing that to happen. We'll regulate that in the parking section.
when we get to this diagram,
Okay,
if you look down at the very bottom. Where it talks about parking placement. There are a couple of places where it allows for some parking in the front, temporary drop off and handicap spaces, but. Generally speaking, all the parking goes in the back.
I have a quick question about that. I may be
Yeah.
completely wrong about
No,
this.
you are asking great questions.
I
Please.
was under I was led to believe that parking would count for your setback. So if the 24 feet minimum is there, parking can only be 24 feet minimum back. Is that true or not? Can you put parking within that setback?
Yeah.
Okay. It's a good answer.
Yeah, no, it depends. There are, generally speaking. You want parking in the back, but. There's also a way to encourage on-street parking, which is good for. Slowing down traffic. It's good for, economic development in terms of having spaces be readily available. In front of. The staffing establishments for kind. And. So much of this that ends up being how the site is. Designed, it's also gonna be. At some point, it will not bar any of this, but. There will be further conversations with Public Works, further conversations with the police department and the fire department. So that we make sure that before this goes through, we will send this. Just like we do anyway, with every application, we will send this to all department heads and. Have them take a look at it. We will probably do an internal meeting with them on this, I think, just because of the complexity of it. They're gonna love us.
so the frontage is the drawings there. So where are we gonna put those? Are we those the definitions?
No, this is basically a one-page cheat sheet
Oh, no.
for each
I'm
zone.
sorry, I'm still in the trees.
Oh, sorry.
I'm still in the trees. I'm lost in the trees.
These can go in the definitions, they can, and or they can go in as a page with a paragraph added about, what the purpose of this is.
Yeah, I would definitely either remove them or be very clear in guidelines, because sometimes, people aren't very creative, they'll just pick it up and try to jam it into some sort of application. So if you're providing a sense of what could be done there, it should be for demonstration purposes only or whatever. I don't know, I'd just be careful about that, but it's great information, but.
It could go after the zoning definition, so kind of like Jason said, we could put it, it's an example of what is explained in those tables.
Yeah, and unfortunately, it's got some specific language in there that might be contrary to what we're putting in for setbacks and things
Yep.
too.
Hence my
Shall be.
disclaimer in the email.
Yeah.
Yes. These are much more prescriptive. Prescriptive. And I agree that we want to be careful about doing that.
Well, and it's somebody else's graphic too, Leslie. It says
Yeah.
table A. But I would think that as
It is
clever
free
as
to
it
be
is,
used.
I wouldn't include it. I hate to say it, I just wouldn't include it in our regulations because it doesn't. It causes more problems than it adds value.
Leslie, this is something that you were future town planner would be at a meeting, you'd be sharing this information with the applicant, right? You'd get into examples of that. So yeah, maybe it's not. It's more confusing to be in the pages here.
There are a couple of definitions and examples that I would want to keep in the, for instance, shop fronts. There's language in here that it allows you to require shop fronts. The type of frontage, the type of facade of a part of a building or all of a building. And what that does is it's basically a roughly 70% glazing. So that Hall's is a great example of a shop front. It's an inviting place. It can have, the sort of angled walls in, which is inviting, gets you in out of the rain while you're.
Yeah, but where do you want to put that 70% glazing requirement? It's not in this graphic.
Yep, no, right, this is the shop front actually it's the last one.
No, I know, I'm reading
Oh,
it. What I'm
sorry.
saying is, this is somebody else's graphic, unless you're able to edit the language to the left of the pictures. Then I don't think this table as a whole should be included in our regulations.
I'm sorry.
If we want to talk about shop front guidelines or restrictions, then I think that should be included somewhere.
That's fine,
If anywhere, I mean, maybe definitions.
that's fine. So,
All right, so the next, we're still in, 1.6 F, right, dimensional standards, now I've got the table. It's got all the, this is all the.
This is the meat.
This is the, yeah,
all right,
there you go, I don't know, that's on page 11
Yes.
in my book.
Do we need to throw anything in there that distinguishes between the height expressed in feet and the height expressed in stories? Otherwise, do we run the risk of somebody coming in with a proposed 50-foot 2-story building, they want the 22-foot ceiling on both floors?
yes, and I believe that somewhere in here it says that height is measured in feet, not in stories. So I can also go through and the one place that stories is helpful for people to look at is in these diagrams. And they have an arrow that says what the maximum height is in feet. And in some of these, I know that some of these are not correct. I do have a program that will allow me to change the text.
But to Jason's point, if we say, it can be a 35-foot building, but we don't say how many stories, it could be 1 story, right? And that would kind of sort of defeat the purpose of.
Well, the question is, do we? How much, and I'm not opining on this, I'm just. How much do we want to regulate? What if somebody wants to do a ballroom?
Yeah, that's exactly the example I was thinking of.
But they want to do it on Bridge Street and they want to do it in an area that's next to residential and some mixed use and maybe a restaurant. That it has those sort of typical stories that we would understand as stories, but they want the full height. There is a if you look at paragraph 2, under building height, that top graphic,
The GCR,
there is a limit on what you can count as a story. So first floor can't, anything over 25 feet would count as 2 stories.
So
okay,
I think that how it's worded in page 11, this graph here, I think that makes sense, right? We don't want to limit, it's limiting the, 2 stories, 35 feet. But we're not limiting, what's going on inside of it, we're just limiting the look of the building more than anything without limiting what can be built inside of it, if that makes sense. I think that's really the only thing we should be looking at, especially with these types of this type of document, the look of the building, or the character of the building and the environment, not what's happening inside necessarily. At least,
one year it could be a ballroom, next year it could be a drone sales showroom.
so long as it's 2 stories, yes.
Are we concerned that someone would say, well, this is just a 2-story building, it's just 40 feet high? Are we concerned with that? Or do we not think that that's?
I'm sorry.
Like, if someone wanted to say, this is a 2-story building, it's just higher than your building height max.
Well, I think in which case that would be not allowed because it exceeds the feet maximum.
Yeah, it's
Right.
the feet that would rule. That's why I think it's really important to have that distinction. And that language is in here somewhere.
So we would take out the stories language here
Take
and
out
just
the
leave,
stories.
we would just leave the feet, that's what.
And I can tell you, I've had experiences with this language in other places where I put it in. And I have had conversations with people who, and look, it needs to present as 2 stories to the street. If you want to put all your HVAC equipment on the 2nd floor, if you want to put your grandmother in that floor, I mean, I care less about what's going on than I care about what it does for the street.
Okay.
Yes,
So when you say that language, you're talking about using the height rather than the number of stories, correct?
yes,
Which clarifies my question, because in that description, you put 14 feet unless it's a 4 commercial function, which must be a minimum of 11 feet with a maximum of 25 feet. So I'm looking at, okay, if you've got 1 story that's 25 feet, that only gives you 10 feet to do the 2nd story. But you just said that if it's 25 feet, that's considered 2 stories. So I think that should be worded in here.
yeah,
The 25 feet is considered 2 stories.
okay. I mean,
It's in the top one, the
Mhm.
second paragraph. Because I'm calculating at home. Okay, so that's 39 feet, which is higher than the maximum.
Okay. I will find that language. It may be in here, but it may not be.
I think there's some value in maybe even a legend or something that, when folks see 35 feet, 50 feet, they won't immediately start going, first floor is gonna be this, and then it means, do the finger math. I think there's value in saying 2 stories nominal, 4 stories nominal, you know what I mean? So that there's a key for those who haven't spent 18 months looking at these things and understand, the division of heights, but
That's actually, if you look at this chart,
Page 11.
mhm.
the number of stories is parenthetical. And
I got you, but unless it's expressed as nominal, somebody will try to hold us to, which of your metrics is the dominant.
yeah, if there's not language in here already, there definitely will be language that says all height is measured in feet.
Yeah, I think having the stories there for reference is very helpful.
Yeah, even if you just say that,
And
heights are, allowed heights are measured in feet, stories,
provided.
listed or story provided are. I think that's legalistic enough for us to provide a key for those, you need to understand what that height entails.
Overall, I think this looks really good and it's what you guys are seeing. The unique table.
I do think we still have some, I'd like to go over in future meetings, perhaps the setback stuff, just to make sure that, we talk about setback, parking and setbacks and non-conforming issues potentially.
I would definitely like to talk about parking. Like, big one, big one.
Well, let's keep, everybody good, keep going for a while. So Leslie, on page 11, on the table.
Yep.
Under the GC, we still have the 2 units per parcel in there. Like that language, that I thought we were taking out, right?
Wait. Page 11?
Yep.
It's big.
Under GC proposed,
Yeah, under GC, residential density,
Oh.
2 units per parcel, I agree. We're not changing the baseline GC.
well, I thought we were gonna take that language out of the baseline GC.
You all tell me, I left GC the way that it is, but this is, I did it in part because I wanted to have this conversation. I wanted to be sure that we had this conversation. And if we take it out or change it, we're doing it deliberately, not because it's something I did inadvertently or it's a Scrivener's error or something.
So we had been talking about taking it out.
Yep.
And on page 5, going back, sorry,
It's okay.
the mixed use building containing dwelling units and and no mixed building shall contain more than 2 dwelling units is crossed out.
Okay, then I think,
Yeah.
for consistency's sake, we just remove it from GC.
Right, that's what I was, that's what I was thinking. On the table, it should match whatever whatever the language says, but. I mean, provided that's what people think we ought to do. I mean, because it's still, per parcel is still pretty restrictive.
I agree. And parcels are a stupid metric.
They're all different sizes on the.
Right, I mean, but there's everything
An acre and a half versus
Right,
a quarter acre.
you know, and
So let me ask you this. Do we want to? What do we want? I think we should take the word parcel out. What density do we want to allow in a GC? Because that's what this,
Yeah.
so this would be in that, so the GC, the only areas left GC are basically along North Street. Correct?
and Cumbies and.
Right, but there are other ones, there are other ones that are, there's another one that's, that along Main Street, right by EB,
Yes.
right, but that's
Yeah.
commercial. And so so in those parcels, would we want to limit that to 2 dwelling units per acre? I mean, or two dwelling units per parcel or some other density? Is there's some sensible density, I guess, would be my question, what's a sensible density for places like that? And some of it's gonna depend on how big the parcel is, right, because if you were to put it on where Ortega's is, it's gonna be hard to get.
But
more
that's
than
not
a
an
couple
acre.
units.
Yeah, but that's not an acre. That's a.
No, I understand, but
So
I'm just,
I
Just
can. why
just
don't
for
I
frame of reference, this top large parcel in GCR 50, upper left-hand corner, is 2 acres. So 120 units possible in that parcel.
Yeah, I think we should definitely have an acre versus per parcel language. And then looking at comparing just between the jump from GC to GCR 35. What ratio would that want to be? We're jumping by half or by double. So we could do 12, but that's still.
Maybe 1,000.
yeah, so yes, I mean, I don't think that they would. Look at the street, if somebody decided to put a two-story building that had multiple units, maybe they would bought a small bedroom unit. I don't think that would be a problem. But,
Yeah, I don't either, and that's, why we're talking about taking it out. But it, there may be some reasonable density we want to put as a max. Right?
Okay,
What would happen if we put in A? No, what I mean is, by not specifying a max,
oh,
there are other boundaries in place that would limit what you could do. Right, 2 stories or 35-foot height.
then you develop the closets in New York that you don't want the kids living in.
Yeah, okay, I'm just asking, thinking out loud about. Because do we arbitrarily pick, 12 units per acre? What does that mean? You know what I mean?
We kind of did, because we say 24 units per acre, and that was my question. Is if an acre is 43,000 square feet, a little less.
I got an idea. Since GC and GC 35 both have the same height restriction. Minimum lot area 4,000 square feet, about 24 units per acre in GC as well.
Works for me.
Yeah.
I mean, it's consistent.
Yeah.
If it's good enough for GC or 35, it should be good enough for GC, right? I mean, it's. The only problem, I mean, the only thing is, the GC zone is, the GC zone is, there's more adjacent existing residences. Right, that's the only, so you might. Right, you might
Yeah.
run into more,
But you're still up against all the other boundaries in place.
right,
So you're only gonna get 2 stories. You're gonna have to have setback and parking and yada yada, so.
All the parking, when we get to, you'll see when we get to the parking actually ends up crunching some of that number.
down.
Like, you're not automatically entitled to the 24
Right,
units per acre. You can put that many, if you could fit it, along with the right number of parking spaces. The,
egress
Right.
for emergency vehicles, all those things.
All the
that, have to
setbacks
be,
and-
yeah.
There is one thing on this table that I will die on this hill.
okay,
The title, could we do a different color? than-
yes, definitely, definitely.
I had to have it up a different
Sorry.
way.
My apologies, yes.
That's okay.
Color.
So. So we're gonna use 24 units per acre. GC as well. Everybody want to take like 5 minutes? Are you guys back or what?
Sorry about that.
All
I
right.
thought it was very slick. I'm like, I'll just be quick.
You want to take 5 minutes for a bathroom break or should we just keep
I'm good.
moving on? No.
You should be.
All right, so we're gonna use 24 units per acre, at least for.
For now.
Okay. On this table, on the minimum lot area. For the GCR 50.75 and 75, and GCR 75. A minimum lot area of 4,000 square feet, is that really reasonable?
If it depends on what you want to build. If you want to use, if you're in that zone and what you want to do is, everything becomes, they're all, things will, yes, they're all relative. So that things, as the size of a lot goes down.
So the other requirements would, in practicality, drive up the minimum lot size, is that basically what you're saying?
Yes, but you'd have to acquire those lots. If you own a smaller lot,
Right,
you
no,
could, you could do,
but that's what I'm saying, the 4,000 square foot would limit your ability to do the 48 units per acre.
What I was trying to, I understand what you're saying. But you're not doing the whole acre. If you're not doing the whole
Right.
acre, you can do the quarter acre at whatever
Would be 12.
number you said was. divided by 12.
48.
Okay, yes, 12. So you could do, and what that reads as on the street would be the same density as if it was a 1 acre lot.
Okay, that,
That's all.
it's. I'm not gonna die on that hill.
Let me shoot. I'm not understanding that because could you explain that to me again, please?
Well, all right, if you have a minimum lot size of 4,000 square feet.
Yeah.
And your density is 60 units per acre.
Yeah.
4,000 square feet is like 1/11 of an acre.
Yep.
So your density is 5 and some change units.
So the density is going to be,
No,
Based on the lot
density
size.
stays the same, but the application of the density changes. If this is your 1/11 of an acre,
Yep.
and this is your 1 acre, and this is 1 to 6 feet. 1 acre, 60 units.
I think we're saying the same thing.
10th of an acre.
I have no doubt we're saying the same.
I'm just saying, in the zone, if you happen to have a 4,000 square foot parcel.
Yep.
But the density allowed is 60 units per acre, you get 5.5 units worth that you can squeeze into your 4,000 square foot parcel, provided that you meet all the other requirements.
it should be stated there because when I'm looking at this, if I'm the average person, I'm gonna say, okay, I've got 4,000 square feet, I can put 60 per acre. I'm going to build as many as possible. And I know people, that's why I'm,
But we are allowing you to build up to 50 feet or up to 75 feet, depending on which zone you're talking about, at 60 units per acre.
but it's the same thing for the GRC 35. It's,
Yeah, 48 units per acre.
it's 24 units per acre.
Yep.
Right,
So if you're looking at allocating that based on your theory, and it's 1/10 of an acre, you're only getting 2 units.
right, and the same could be used in the opposite, if you had a 2 acre parcel. Then you could, in a GCR 35, you could do 48 units on the 2 acre.
I'm not concerned about the big lot, I'm concerned about the little lot.
Well, right, but I'm saying it works backwards and forwards.
And I know at the casino, they had houses that were torn apart inside, and you've got lockers with different cots in front of them. I just don't want to see somebody saying, well, I've got 4,000 square feet, I can put 24 little 10 by 10 bedrooms in there.
That's why it's so important to take away the per parcel aspect
Right.
of this and make it
per acre.
Yeah, because there are other rules about.
Yeah.
Sizes of rooms inside structures.
Well, it's gotta have a kitchen and a bathroom to be a dwelling unit, right?
Right. If you,
Okay, so
if
the
you
one-
happen to have a 0.9 acre parcel, 0.09 acre parcel, then you can build up to this high, up to this many units. I don't know that many that we have that are quite that small. I've got one of the smallest and it's 0.12. So I could round up to that third unit, following all the other rules.
This may be, this may be a dumb question, but because you have to have, kitchen area and everything, can you remove residential density max, period? Or do we need to
I
have
don't
that
want to
in?
go to that. I'm not being blunt, I think. There is something to be said for. We've talked about missing middle housing and sort of easing from lower density to higher density on purpose. and doing it purposefully. I think if everybody was a responsible developer, everybody's a responsible landlord. You could do that. I don't. I would not recommend it.
Yeah, but I don't know enough about the building codes of exactly what parameters are required for, you know, the designation, but
There's also state.
I would say along those lines too.
700 square foot units fill just about exactly an acre.
Yeah.
About border to border. Few more than 60, but that's Jason's, mechanic math. So in order to have parking and everything else, you got to squeeze the building size, which means up a story. And so there's, I just use 700 as a benchmark because it's been discussed that, some of the input we received is that, there's a hunger for 700 square foot, 1 or 2 bedroom apartments kind of thing. So the more you have setback and parking and whatnot, now you've raised a story or 2. So you could get 60 units inside of an acre, and not have to go to 10 stories to do it, and have them all be 700 square feet, just as a starting point.
with the other requirements for parking and everything else, you're limiting that density to something that's not ridiculous, so maybe it's not necessary to have that line in your eye.
We've defined the form so much that it restricts natural density.
If
And,
you
and
remove-
realistically, a developer isn't gonna build something that's not rentable. I mean, there's gonna be a lot of money invested here. You're not gonna look at, locker size things. So you have the building codes,
That's
parking
where
requirements, the setbacks, all that. That's gonna give you what we need to enforce this without having that line item in the chart.
But that's where I get concerned, because I've seen those locker size, closet sized apartments. And with the shared bathroom down the hall and the kitchens, and they make me very nervous.
Well, it's not a way we want it. It's not something we actually want to see, I don't think.
No, but would that be economically viable for a developer developing in this place? 'Cause I can see
If
those
they
in New
could,
York.
if they could, I think the answer is yes. And we might not even know about it for 5 years.
One of the questions that the public put to us when we had our first round of public hearings was, how many units does that mean? How many people, how many new cars, and all the other things that come along with, if you picture that 2 acre parcel, the 2 acre one is next to a one that's 1.7 or something like that, owned by the same owners. It's like an investment company. So the possibility of combining those lots, building several 4-story, 50-foot tall, multiple unit buildings, allowing for parking and all those things. People wanted to know, well, how many units could be there? Not that it has to be developed that way, but what's the maximum we're looking at? So, I think that some amount of density maximum, there's appetite for that as well, from the public. That you wouldn't just suddenly go from single family homes on one block and on the other side, suddenly you've got, closets, hundreds and hundreds of units.
I agree. I'm just trying to understand, doesn't the parking requirements, like if you're gonna try to jam in 60 units,
Yeah.
you need 60 parking spaces, right?
At least.
So that's a density cap right there.
I think it'd be worthwhile to run the numbers and figure out just for a given acre.
Yeah.
How many units could you get,
Including the parking.
including parking?
I think we did that with the 5 corners. That was was it 1 acre?
That was very tight. That was, I think it was a little over 1 acre.
And how many apartments was he gonna do?
80, yeah.
80. So you had 1 acre with 80 apartments and room for parking and setbacks.
I think that, you know, I agree that like the limitations we're putting on already block that density build. But I think putting a max number on the density just gives us a little bit more leeway in how we wanna, you know, structure these zones, you know? It just gives us another tool that we can use when looking at density. So I think there should be a max stated so that we have that tool in our back pocket.
But I think it would be worth it to do the exercise of calculating what that looks like before we settle on the density max. You know, because maybe 60 isn't the number, maybe you run the numbers and you know you can't get to more than 44, or you could go a lot more than 60, and maybe we should entertain more than 60 in the GCDR 75, or something like that. I don't know what that looks like yet, allowing for, you know, legal parking spaces with egress paths and setback and all those things. I think that, you know, once you squeeze the square footage in a given acre down to what the building footprint can be, then you know what the maximum height can be, and you know, units per floor, and then we can
You've
work
got
from there.
1 acre with 80 apartments. And parking, sufficient parking. I think they even had excess parking. Oh, that was because
They had the extra lot.
was that included in the 1 acre?
I think so. I think the whole project was a little over.
And that allowed for 80 cars even.
It allowed for 80 apartments. I don't remember what the parking
120.
Yeah, so it's like 120 or 120 something.
Do not ask me what I had for breakfast.
Yeah.
All right, so Leslie, is it possible to do a calculation of
I will,
what that would reasonably, what could reasonable?
I'm gonna do a
Reasonably
1 acre,
put
I'll try and do
1
a 1 acre.
Yeah.
For each of these, anybody who can't sleep tonight who wants to run a spreadsheet and send it to me. Have at it.
No, I think that's great, Leslie. It's worthy work because this is
I
hard
agree.
to understand, like.
Yep.
Yeah, it is, and I will tell you, I did not make up these numbers. These numbers are from they're out of the smart code, which have been tested to death. But it doesn't mean that we don't want it to, the whole point of the smart code is that these kinds of exercises, calibrating it to the local condition is really, really important.
I just think there's value in us being able to defend those numbers
Right?
You know,
You're right.
with real
How'd you
application.
come up with that?
Yeah, just as we've discussed, having a graphic that, you know, another determination of what 4-story building on the west side of Thames Street looks like from Church Street. You know, I think being able to say, that means, you know, 1 acre, if you were to divide that parcel in 2, you could get just this number of units within the parameters that we're proposing.
And I think once they've experienced the first public hearing, they'll understand. Because that question was asked over and over and over.
Yeah.
So I really think, and, you know, we'd like to think that every builder is a reputable builder. But you will find there are some people who just want to make a buck, and you will get those locker apartments. And I know Montville had issues with, yes, we have a sewer system here, but they had sewer running down the streets because the houses couldn't, you know, they don't have sewer systems. The houses couldn't absorb the waste, and it's just a disaster.
Well, yeah, they ended up turning a bunch of single family homes basically into
Yeah.
rooming houses.
Well, that's also another consideration is, you know, we're you know, when I say, you know, closets, you know, they can be of varying sizes, but if you, for instance, you get a job, you have a house, a family, everything's going great, kids are in school, you know, you're paying down your mortgage, and you get a job at EB, and you have to be in Groton City 5 days a week for the next 5 years, because whatever you do for submarines is gonna take that long. You don't wanna buy another house, you don't wanna move everybody you want a little place to stay. And you don't want to spend a lot of money on it, so. On the one hand, the idea of a series of closets has its appeal to some people, but that's not, then there, at some point, you know, those little rooms get, you know, people don't care about them the same way. People
Well,
don't,
that's the Eastern Point efficiencies. Right,
sure,
and then room.
Yeah, and
But-
actually, things within the GCR 75. I mean, but you're starting to get into topics that we've already been chided for, things that we can't opine upon in this body, so. you know, I think there's value in having a maximum. I just think that we should have an informed maximum, so we know what that looks like and we can defend it.
Agreed. But to get to Sue's question, which is, you know, what stops somebody from putting a bathroom and a kitchen and 60 little bedrooms on an acre? I mean, how do you, and calling that, you know, a unit?
But we are allowing rooming houses in the GC,
Right, by special permit,
right, yeah.
but is it, but
so the
What-
the
what's- what-
thing that does.
what? how do you
Let's
differentiate?
say somebody comes in, they show us great drawings, a special permit. And they go downstairs to the building department, they get their building permit. And they start pouring their foundation, they start doing everything, put everything up. Happen to have some extra studs in the wall in a couple of places where you know, they might want to build another wall. Tee into it. The fire marshal is by law required to inspect every multifamily housing unit every year. So that's one thing. We had a repeat customer here a couple of months ago who came in because he didn't do what he was supposed to do and built a unit that was non-consistent with the plans that this committee had approved. So people eventually do get caught. We don't want to be in a position of, it's really, it comes down to the health, safety and welfare clause that we're all bound by. And that's like line number 1, 2, and 3 on every ethics, everything for engineers, architects, planners, everything. We have inspectors, building inspectors, fire inspectors, all of that who do a great job.
All understood.
But can those walls go in to then cut one room into 3 with a bathroom down the hall? It could happen.
I don't, okay, taking illegal modifications off the table because people do stupid stuff that doesn't come back on planning and zoning. Can we wrap our heads around what is like minimum room sizes or something by the building code that we can use for our calculation?
Yeah, my point with this was just making it more consistent and understandable what we were asking for in the density, right? For a developer to come in, not necessarily to get into making it more possible to have little small units, but.
So we're looking at a calculation, I think a 1 acre lot is the minimum setback. For everything, and the number of stories and calculate what.
Yeah, what's the most number you could get following all the rules, including parking and setbacks and.
You can use a 700 square foot as a rule of thumb for the area of a good size one.
And that at least would give you a higher number as to what the maximum.
Okay.
Our first apartment was 700 square feet. Neil had 2 bedrooms. The second bedroom was, I think that included the balcony and the bathroom. Weirdly, the bathroom, you could hold a square dance in it. It was really oddly big, but 700 is probably a, fair benchmark if it's a big one bedroom or, cozy two bedroom.
All right, good. We talked about the lot areas, we talked about the density. We're talking about minimum heights, so we don't want a bunch, we don't, saying they have to be at least 35 feet high, right? For two family stores, correct?
Correct.
In all these GCs.
Yeah.
Right. Okay, the max heights, that, those are by sort of a definition, but we've talked about those, right? The secondary buildings, we've got max heights of 20 feet on all of them. That would be like, garages and things like that. But, okay. That makes sense to everybody, 20 feet seem reasonable. The minimum height, again, we're saying, well, we say 35 feet is a minimum height for the outbuildings too, is that? Secondary buildings?
That's wrong.
That's weird.
Yeah, and the maximum height is different on the, I mean, it looks like, that looks like maybe a cut and paste.
That's definitely not right. The minimum, I think should be 15. Which is
For a
like
secondary building,
the garage. It's a, I mean, it's
so
the
whatever you
size
want,
of it,
it's your.
but it's the size of a garage, if you do 15. We can have it whatever you.
15, or we were talking about 11 being the minimum for that commercial one-story on that graphic that we were looking at. So I can see there being a desire to have it be a little bit taller than 15, but
I don't know that I'd specify a minimum height for a secondary building.
is there some little tiny garages for like the old garages in Groton that are behind houses? I don't think those are quite 50.
Oh, gosh, there are a couple, they're in the town, but just over the border that are set into a hill.
Yeah.
That are barely 7.5 feet tall.
Yeah.
So if you do it by lumber size. So you're not cutting off a foot
Yeah.
to make it 11 feet. Or having it be 8 feet plus a peak. As a minimum size.
Again, you got setbacks. For the secondary building and a maximum height. I gotta think that a secondary building. There's such a variety of potential secondary buildings that you don't, I don't know, we need to specify a minimum. Height. Because you've got pre-made sheds that could be delivered that might come in all shapes and sizes, and you know what I mean?
Yeah, I don't think we care too, like as from a governing body.
So you can just take that whole section out.
And the max height is, those are the same max heights as above, so as the principal building, so. Or whoever you set the max at.
I think when you look at that secondary building, I think the top line where you have maximum heights is really minimum heights. And then,
Well, for secondaries, I think that's max, I mean, like, so we don't want,
we've got max down here.
Yeah, we've got two maxes.
I think I
right,
needed to go home early.
Just point out.
Taking out those two rows.
yeah, those, the two bottom.
Yeah.
Rows of boxes come up.
No, actually, I'm gonna take these out because.
Yeah.
This matches up.
Right, but we
The
don't
two
want.
rows
secondary
above
buildings that-
setbacks principal building.
Right, you don't, these are for secondary buildings, so you don't want them as the same height as the principal.
For a max.
Yeah.
See, I figured maximum is this, and this was the minimum.
No, I mean, what the discussion was that we set the max height on all these at 20 feet, so we could have like a garage. Right? But not so big that you would have
it could, remember, we also allow ADUs now by law,
Right.
and so 20 feet, we came in building an ADU in his backyard for his mother. Yeah, down in Eastern Point,
Oh, I thought it was Bryce.
not
Yeah.
Eastern Point. real quick.
I know where it is, so
Um,
it's a prospect.
yeah, I think so. So I think the 20 feet does give enough room to have it be. I think you could put like maybe a loft. in it.
So if you're building a garage, that's a secondary building, can't be as high as your house.
Correct.
That's nuts.
Now you're gonna get the car up there to the second story.
No, but, you know, if you're putting an ADU above a garage, you, 20 feet might limit you to
You
a flat
won't have
roof.
enough room.
Right.
You have to do the whole thing.
And you just lost your garage.
Yeah.
So it's 20 feet, right? And we allow the use for the, do we need to put words in our permitted accessory building use to?
Do we allow ADUs on multi-family lots?
That's single dwellings. isn't it?
We don't have regulations on ADUs at all right now.
Right. But-
ADUs,
I mean, cause I, you know, I've been.
no, they're allowed as of by law. The law is by right on any single family.
That's what I thought, yeah, that it's a.
It's only single family.
Could we specify 20 feet, but additional in if you have an ADU on top of the secondary building? I know that's a lot of wording, but. You know, so you can build a garage, you know, so. If we increase the max height of 20 feet, people are gonna potentially build these huge garages and not include an ADU. You know?
I'm okay with a huge garage.
I think so.
If you can fit it with all the other rules, the setback and everything else, can we just say 25? Would that,
So you can't have it the same height as the building.
I think 25's, to me, what's the, you see a big problem there?
I can imagine good design and bad design. That's my problem. So. And then the question is, would we, I'm
Well.
just putting it out, is do we want to have ADUs included as accessory buildings, or do we want to define accessory buildings as non-livable structures?
accommodations for security guards, what does that mean? No, it's back on page 7, but accommodations for security guards.
That's not an
caretakers.
ADU. We don't
Sure.
no.
Bunk out for the security guard.
Well, that's what happened like on Bridge Street, right?
What are the chances of having a security guard? Or a single.
Caretaker,
The caretaker you could easily have on
An ADU.
with an ADU with a single family. Rich person's house,
We're not talking about single family, here, that's the thing.
but we do, single family is allowed.
If we go with defining ADUs separately from accessory buildings, we get into more detailed definitions of things, which I think we wanted to stay away from. So maybe we keep it the way it is, but we raise the max height with the thought of the ADUs.
I'm okay with that.
I still think there should be somewhere in 4.6 Echo that we say that it's allowed for use of a dwelling unit. If we intend to allow ADUs.
We
That's
have
not-
to by law.
Then if that's not up to us, then we need to put it in our regulations where we intend them to, or where we, because if everybody assumes that means I can make an apartment above the garage, then apartment above the garage needs to be an allowed use of the accessory building.
So why don't I look into what some other towns have done?
Mhm.
Yeah.
For AD language.
I think that's good. We can come back and decide if we want it to be 20 or 25, or we could say it would be 20 for the GC and GCR and 25 on the, what the height is of primary building is about. Sure, when it's higher. So, the accessory building would end up being taller than the primary.
Okay, so do we want to leave the 20 for now, knowing that we're gonna come back to it? I can put a note in.
Yeah, let's do that. All right, so setbacks.
Okay, let me explain. This is a little confusing. But it makes sense. So generally, the setbacks are the distance you have to be from each parcel. And the way this is thought out is that if you're on a corner, you have two setbacks, primary and secondary. Generally speaking, your primary setback would be from the major road. If you're just in a grid of suburbia, basically sort of follow what is on the road. Like if everybody on East Street is, that's their primary setback. Follow, but there's also language about the average distance from the street. Anyway, the thing I think that is most important to comprehend is that there is a distance, there's a range where you can be back from the street. So if you want a front porch, you can have that front porch be closer to the street. You could have the whole thing further back, but that's it, so it doesn't all look like, a bunch of boxes all lined up. There's some flexibility, but not so much that you're getting so much spatial relief that you feel lost. Side setbacks, the reason for the 12 is that is the smallest distance you want between you and your neighbor. So 0 to 12, if your neighbor is at 0, you want to allow for 12 on yours. That's also a typical width for a driveway going back. Rear setbacks, the reason that they're so small is so that you can maximize the use of the backyard and still have a little bit, enough room to repaint or reside or build or rebuild or whatever. I can tell you that where I live, a lot of these dimensions they're exactly what is written here. I didn't take it from that. It's just the neighborhood that I live in has abided by this since before these were ever written.
I think mine for the building was 4 feet side and rear setback. And I'm in R5.2.
I have a question about the side setback.
Yep.
So you mentioned that if your neighbor is, 0 inches from the setback, that means they're right on the line, correct? And so you wanna be, at least 12 or 12.
You could be 0.
So, I mean, there are places, I lived in Woodstock, and there are places in Woodstock, Connecticut that have, less than 12-inch right there, side setbacks, and you can hear. If someone's talking in this house and their window's open and your window's open, you
Yeah.
can hear that.
Yeah.
So I just, want to bring the attention that a 0 minimum side setback is pretty generous, pretty right there. So I don't know if we want to look at side setbacks at all, or.
If this, what we're talking about is developing a more urban condition. We're not looking at making even, we're not looking at making the suburbs, we're not looking at making what's sometimes known as worker housing in the individual house or duplex kind of scenario. The advantage of having a 0, I'm not sure this is answering your question, but I'm gonna say it. And then I'm gonna stop talking. The advantage of allowing for a 0 side yard setback is that you can then have a party wall between 2 buildings and continue the streetscape. People don't like to walk. They don't like to walk past curb cuts. So having lots of curb cuts makes the place less walkable. People also don't like walking past spaces that buildings that don't have doorways every 25-ish feet apart. These numbers are taken from the way malls were designed, which were taken from basically older New England municipalities. Where people, honestly, the best thing I can do is say, everybody should Sierra, we should invest in measuring tapes with our logo.
I would just point out, because we're kind of launching into this discussion about side setbacks, the side setbacks that are in the pages for each special zone.
Yeah.
Don't match what's in table on page 11. You got 0 minimum, 6 inches minimum, and the rest of them are 12-foot minimum. So the only one that doesn't have its own page is GC.
The chart doesn't match this.
Chart doesn't match the follow-on pages that specify things for each.
Pages with the graphics for each, 35, these pages, it doesn't match.
Yeah, those all say 12-foot minimum side setback.
It should say max.
What I will say, in terms of not wanting necessarily 0-inch minimum side setbacks is, there are issues that can arise with it's not related necessarily, but short-term rentals have been a hot button issue around Connecticut. And that was something that was constantly brought up with the side setbacks being so close. Is that, your neighbors or whatever may throw these larger parties and you can hear it, the side setbacks are that close. Again, when you can go out and touch both houses with your hands but stretched like that. So I understand the desire for that kind of increased density in some areas. But would just be my only concern, neighbor-wise.
It's a great point. I agree with you, except for the fact that where I balance this out is it's such a narrow area of the city that we're trying to focus on, and this is in line, as I read it, with the POCD and the walkable neighborhood. So we are trying to specifically create just in this part of the city an area where people would have those, shared walls and everything. It obviously wouldn't fit. It doesn't fit in very few places. So it's a very good point, but this is the reason why I'm open to 0 setback in this particular.
You're picturing the possibility of building brownstones that are right up against each other, But by all the other things that we have in place, if you required parking in the rear, at least one end of the building would have to have a 12-foot setback, so you could have.
Yes,
Yeah,
and the idea is that you would only have 1 or 2 entrances into the parking.
Yeah.
So that
Well,
it's
but-
not a private,
Isn't it not useful to talk about how you hear people on other sides of the property if we're talking about building apartments? Because all of those apartments share walls, they, and all sides.
There are permits, but there's also, GC allows for single family uses, single family building as well, right? So you can have two single family units 2 inches apart from each other, right?
Right.
And maybe we do want, maybe the goal is we can have buildings with shared walls, but this theoretically allows, an 8-inch alleyway between these buildings that really can't be accessed or used for anything.
We
and that just
actually
seems-
have that on Main Street.
Yeah,
Well, to that I would say, if there's no minimum expressed and there's a, maximum expressed, and you choose to build your single family home with 0 setback on one of your borders, and your neighbor chooses to build a structure close to you, shame on you. Very always with the neighbor.
It's a good point, but the other thing is, remember the amount of lots we're talking about here. When we looked at this, there's not that many parcels in this space where, it's a good point if we're talking in a broader area, but this has, we're dealing with a few optional potentials, probably the way this will develop, there'll be a few parcels that would take advantage of that, and I don't know,
All right, devil's advocate here, since the interest, one of our interests is to, provide boundaries to allow for increased housing. As long as, I'm picturing GCR 50 right now, just so you know where my head is at. GCR 50, some multi-acre parcels with existing 3 and 4 story buildings on them right now. Single family home use allowed. And say someone purchases that north unit at 2.04 acres, wants to put a single family home in there. And so single family home, height maximum, is established. Height minimum established, so it's at least 35 feet. And, we say minimum or maximum setback 12 feet. The single family home on a 2-acre property, it's gotta be no more than 12 feet from the property line.
Might not make sense to put a single family in this.
Yeah, I
If
mean,
we're
that's,
trying to
Yeah.
encourage development.
Well,
I agree.
Nobody's gonna buy that and put that there. I mean, to finance it, and, obviously when this is out there, it will attract, there's the financial considerations and things like that. And what fits in this area, it's sort of designed, it's pulling everything into what the POCD is desiring to see filled in. So, I mean, somebody wanted to, sure, but I think that we're gonna, the zoning is designed to attract the development that the city and the residents want.
Or at least
So
allow.
in here, by designing it, we are creating a disincentive to put a single family house, in GCR 50.
There
But
is,
it doesn't preclude somebody wanting to do that, but I think they'd get a lot of bang for their buck by building that house somewhere else, but.
there are a couple of single family homes. There's one down, I can't remember if it's the end of Monument
Yeah,
or.
in the 35 though, on the east side of things.
True. Um,
And the bridge,
and then,
in the GC.
But they were built how long ago? I can't see anybody knowing what's going on, building a house here.
It just won't be the highest and best use anymore. After
Right.
this zoning changes, the economic drivers
Agreed.
will bring that.
And who wants to build a house next to a car detail place? So we could spend hours trying to figure this out, but I just don't think it's logical that single family houses start going there. Now, you've got how many applications for it?
And again, I just wanted to say for the record, I'm only talking about this area. We're not
Yeah.
talking about broadly speaking. This is a very narrow area that we're entertaining this to sort of attract that walkable, sustainable, it's a gateway area on the highway, So, yeah, so that's why I'm inclined to be aggressive with it, be like, yeah, this is a good idea to sort of see if we can even get someone to be interested in helping invest like that.
So the only thing I would add is based on bitter experience at Five Corners was that neighbors' concern about a big building being within, I think was 4 feet was the setback on the side yard. Being that close to them. Yeah.
Yeah.
Remember that?
And
And I know we're talking about a different situation here, but at the public hearing, you're gonna hear it. That, you know, there'll be all kinds of people talking about, you're gonna build this giant thing right next to my house. That's, you know, which is, you know, I think where you start some of this discussion.
And I think that's what we have prevented by breaking up the zones, you
Right?
know, because
I don't disagree with you, but it just,
starting on east side or west side of things, the, you know, most you can go is 4 stories. And with 12-foot minimum setback on the side. Right?
well,
Or are you going off the chart?
yeah,
We've been going up to 0 setback on the chart.
but,
Or 0 feet, sorry.
but so anyway, I mean, it's just, when we hear that, we're just gonna have to be willing to discount it as not really applicable to this.
There.
But that's, you know, we're likely to hear it, that's all, that's probably.
The worst we'll get though, following that experience is on the very borders of the zone.
Right.
You know,
Right,
where there is
right.
existing structure and the potential for very close on the property line construction.
That's the only place that, yeah.
Own all the property. If you own a house and you own that parcel, that's what you own, like,
Yeah.
you can't.
that's a lovely theory.
Have you ever been to a public hearing?
Well,
Sweet child.
you on Facebook?
You really
Don't-
don't. Save yourself.
No, but I mean, you bring up a good point, and I mean, we got a lot of complaints about the potential disruption of view from Church Street. And we know that that's not protected in the least. If you want to protect your view from Church Street, you gotta buy all the property between you and the river. That would be the best way you can protect that, right? Having said that, we still took the public's feedback into consideration in terms of looking at transition from existing 1 and 2 story single family homes to our desire to get more housing density. Is that suddenly, you know, 8-story, you know, super dense housing? That doesn't seem like a good balance, you know, so we took that feedback, we said, okay, if we don't put some cap on and imagine a transition here, then a potential developer would be within the boundaries to just imagine to the stars. And so we said, okay, all right, let's break this down into multiple zones with heights that make sense and are palatable, and yet still give us the opportunity for density. I think with those, you know, 3.5 acres worth of parcels up there in that upper corner of GCR 50, you could still get multiple 4-story buildings that, and you know, with more than 100 units, you know, of available housing that meet the appetite for increased housing and the desire to have some kind of transition from the existing neighborhood. You know, as long as they all conform with the traffic and the parking and everything else. You know, I think we're doing the right thing by spelling the zones out this way.
That's a very good response for when you inevitably have that conversation.
And well,
And we're pointing you.
This will be our spokesman. Oh, geez, don't let me take that. All right, so, one of the things about the setbacks is that, you know, we've got like, on the side setback for the GCR and GCR 35 for 0 minimum, 12 max. Then on the 50, we go for the 6-foot minimum and 18 max. Then on the 50.75, we go from 0 minimum to 12 max, and also on the 70.
Right, I need to revisit this.
Yeah, I think that's, you know.
Okay. I
So
was
it's-
as tired doing this, obviously, as you probably.
As you are right
now.
now.
Sierra and I had a really early morning,
So, so we've got some side setbacks definitely to be looked at, right?
Yeah.
Front setbacks, are we?
I'll
You gonna
look
look at all of them?
Yeah,
Okay. And the frontage build out, what is that?
okay, frontage build out. If you have a lot that is, I'm gonna use 100 for easy numbers. If your lot is 100 feet wide on the front at the street. This is the percentage of that you have to have either a building running across the facade of the building. And it has nothing to do, I'm ignoring for a moment the setbacks and where that facade is on that 100-foot strip. But so if it's 40%, then it needs to be 40 feet along the street. If it's
40 feet of what?
either building or building plus street screen. Okay, and that can be hedging, it can be, there are all kinds of, and it'll be in the definitions, it's on the list. But what that does is it creates an edge on the street so that people don't feel like they're walking by an abyss. One place that, and I think I've mentioned this example before, the funeral home on Thames Street with the arch that you drive through. Everybody know what I'm talking about?
Buyers.
Okay, that's a good example of a building taking up more of the frontage than the building itself. But it holds the edge of the street. So that you don't say, what people really don't like, if that arch wasn't there, you'd be walking by a parking lot. And people tend to stop and turn around when they face that condition. So the idea is not to make it, we lose everybody? Okay. Thank you. Somebody's awake.
I misspoke, it's Biles.
So what it does is it holds the edge so that when you're looking down the street, you have the sense of where that street goes, how it continues, what looks safe and what doesn't. And that edge does so much, particularly when it's on both sides of the street, to defining that outdoor room that we were talking about earlier.
Even, even the curb there that defines
Thank
the
you.
sidewalk lets you know where it's safe to walk. But
Yep.
like you said, we've talked about this before together here. If you're looking at just the back ends of cars, some of them at the sidewalk, some of them like my truck hanging over the sidewalk, you go, should I be walking past there? Is it nothing but potentially moving cars? Maybe I'll go to the other side of the street, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
But what you're proposing is 40% of the width of your frontage needs to be
Something like that.
something like a hedge or even a low wall or something.
Yep,
Um,
plus the building facade would equal, in the case we were talking about, would equal 40 feet.
but
The denser you make the area, the longer you want, the greater percentage you want. And the reason for the 18 feet on the setback is that I have done this. I have made people do this when they told me it couldn't be done. I threw it out and then I marked it out on their undeveloped piece of property to show them what I meant. You don't need, unless you've got trucks coming in, like tractor trailer trucks. You don't need more than 9 feet in width. Per lane. Now, do we all want to pull our mirrors in and take a deep breath as we're going through something like that? Yeah, but that's okay. Because you're pulling into an area where people should not be driving quickly. 18 feet, even if you have to turn a tractor trailer in, you can put the 18 feet, 9 foot lanes, so to speak. You can also do the lanes coming out and have an island. So that you have the 9 foot lanes with an area in the middle that technically you're not, it's not part of the lane, but that if a truck needs to make a large swing to go between two buildings, sorry.
No, I felt like that was kind of a rabbit trail. I think what we're talking about is,
It's because I'm tired.
I got you, no, I understand, but say the GCR 50 is 50.75, 6 foot minimum, 18 foot maximum. From front setback from the lot line,
Sorry, I'm thinking. Side foot. That's for. a
again, we
driveway.
were talking about front build,
That,
frontage build out,
yes,
okay, and that's at the front lot line, which means what? On the far side of the sidewalk?
Yeah.
The
So,
sidewalk is not part of the lot line?
so this is where you need a two surface
yeah,
there,
I thought sidewalk was part of the lot.
no, well, it
depends.
Okay, so
So,
again, simple mechanic.
Yeah.
You know, when we say from the lot line, you know, at the lot line, and then 6 foot to 18 foot setback from the lot line, from the frontage build out,
No,
from the. Work with me here. I'm just saying, all I have in front of me is the verbiage that I have at my disposal.
that I provided you, I understand.
so.
Go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna say, like, so. In a perfect world, or in a lot of times, you have your right of way for your road. We'll say that's a curved road for the sidewalk. So the city would want to have something like this, where they have their right of way, they have their road, their sidewalk, they probably have utilities and things like that running on either side. That's like ideal if you have plenty of space for your road.
Those are your widest lines.
Right, and so this right of way line is the lot line. So this is a good distinction. So it could be all the way over here, but other times it's right next to the road. And what has happened is the city has gotten pedestrian easement so that they can have a sidewalk, even though they don't own the land. And so then the lot line would be right here. So it's a good question.
So the answer is it depends,
It
right?
depends, yeah.
Okay,
But technically, the city owns all of this space if the lot line is all the way out here. And so the city could, so really, what's normally done with zoning codes is they do go from the lot line, even though it changes, because then it's the city's job to come back through and make this a pedestrian friendly space. And that's how it's usually.
So what does that mean for frontage build out, if we want frontage build out to be right at the lot line, if we have a worst case scenario where the lot line is in the sidewalk?
Oh, in this,
What does
Right.
the frontage build out mean, because we can't build on the
we
sidewalk?
want our terminating vista. We want consistent frontage and frontage build out,
Yeah.
but this lot line, and then the next one is here, and the next one is here.
Right.
You know,
so, but
They tend not to jog, they
No, they,
tend to curve.
yeah, they don't go, and that's what these are, these yellow lines, that is the right of way. So they. Very good.
Yeah, I mean, they generally follow the street. don't they?
Exactly. Yeah, and they're usually.
whether they're in the middle of the street, 8 feet off the curb or whatever. Yeah, I got you.
Yeah.
So I think it would be Jason's point important to specify for frontage build out, like in the definition section,
Yes,
that it would start,
yes,
not at the lot line necessarily.
it's, I will give you the definition of frontage building.
And that would be basically not at the lot line, but at the setback, correct?
It,
The frontage built out. Doesn't, you know, because at some of these places where we're saying you have a.
yes,
We're putting in a minimum. Frontage, right? It's gotta be a minimum frontage, a front setback of 6 feet, right? So your frontage build out that would be at 6 feet from the, or is it where you put the building on the lot? So the minimum is 6 feet. If you go 8, you have to have
Build out.
60% covered, 60% build out at the, wherever you put that building. Is that correct?
Yes, and that building has to comply with the setback.
And you could have your porches or those except those overhangs. Those are not related to.
They can, and yes, you can allow for those to encroach, like a bay window could encroach into a setback. A porch could encroach into a setback. A stoop could encroach into a setback.
But one time somebody put gardens.
What happened?
Sure there is.
Um,
And if you don't put a garden in the city's
Rain
land
garden.
right in front of you, they'll get on you for blight off.
all right, so let's just talk about next steps for a minute.
Okay,
Okay, so we're, we still have some work to do here and it's getting late, right? So, we have another meeting next week with only a couple of agenda items, am I correct?
probably.
I mean, there's.
I can't remember, but I am toast.
There's one application
Okay,
that I'm gonna. And so we'll have that. We can take some time to come back to this
sure,
and pick it up where we are now
sure.
and go from there. And see if we can get through the rest of it, or, because we're almost to parking, right? So,
Yeah, so I guess I would say, the things that we've talked about, you've already taken notes on, Leslie. And I think that we have been working off of this chart to use for the numbers that we want to,
Yes, I will.
agree to and defend with the few mods that we've made and the few questions we've asked. So for the other pages that relate to the unique zone,
I will.
I would ask that you scrub those for inconsistencies with this chart. Especially in the graphics that aren't your product.
And sometimes redundancies can just be confusing for.
I totally agree with you. The original document of the smart code has everything in text and everything in diagram. Like, why?
But I really think that,
lawyer must just say.
Paul, to your point, I really think that we could catch up with what we discussed and ask questions about, within within 15, 20 minutes, half an hour, and then be up to 7.1 parking and if we take these and we, as homework between now and next week, we peruse it and see if anything jumps out at us. A lot of this is best practice language and things that some of us have already talked about. Yeah, we could probably get through that pretty quickly as well.
okay. So that's like a plan.
Sounds good. I'm just, if we can, try to frame out like what's the time frame to get this out to the public? Like what?
Thank you for raising that. So I know summer's sort of here. Don't know what everybody's schedule is, but it would be a godsend for me if we could do this, if we could get through all of this in the next couple of weeks. Because this is the 9-dimensional chess game that's going on in my head right now. And as soon as I put it down for too long, I end up having to start over again and go through it all. And it's time consuming, and I'm like, wait, did I put this in this draft or did I put it in that draft? So that would be a wonderful thing.
So I agree that we wanna get it to a public hearing as soon as is practical. But I also wanna make sure we've got all our ducks in a row before we do that. so we don't end up, you know, taking a bunch of, you know, catching a bunch of
We're
arrows.
gonna,
and
we're gonna
spears.
get it right.
Right, because,
But if we can get this, if we can get this draft to something that we're all comfortable with and we've all read a few times. And then we can do our part to circulate it to department heads, get them familiar with it and get their feedback.
because there's some things that, you know, so I think the need for the housing is well demonstrated. The rationale is well demonstrated, it's, you know, it's consistent with the P O C D. It's, you know, it's consistent with the Finney Street study, all those things, right? Where I think we're, you know, where we haven't done a good job of telling the story is, like, you know, we didn't get responses from, you know, emergency services or the police department or Groton Utilities or, you know, so we need to get responses from them that say, yeah, we can manage this.
Yeah, or that's too dense,
Right, or what.
sewer system can't handle, or whatever.
Right, but we need to get a response, just no response means they're okay with it, it's not, I mean, I don't think that's a good position for us to be taking, right? And then the other thing that people were talking about, and I think we've talked about it too, is, you know, some kind of renditions or visualizations that, you know, so we could show people what it could look like.
Yeah.
Right, and so that's another, I don't know how long it would take to round that up. But I don't think we should go to a public hearing until we have. We're happy with this. We, you know, we've got the, you know, the renditions and we've got answers about, you know, our ability to, you know, to handle it in terms of, you know, infrastructure.
Short answer, Bob, I think we're looking at August being the earliest meeting at which we could possibly hold a public hearing to present.
Yeah, I mean, and I completely agree with all that. I'm just thinking, you know, like, finish the term paper. Like,
Yep.
when do we have the drafts that we're all
Yeah.
like comfortable with, and then you can get the renderings we need and everything, and do we need a special meeting in between that? And not to move things too fast, but just to wrap it up, like you said, if we let it go too long, it's harder on everybody and we lose track of certain things. It's like,
We have a meeting next week.
Yeah.
And then there is a 4-week gap to our next meeting. Is that too big a gap?
Yeah, we could come, we could all get together again
Yeah.
in July. But I think targeting August for a public hearing is probably
Right.
reasonable.
Yeah, I mean, it's aggressive enough, I think, because of all the internal discussions and routing and feedback that we need to be ready for the next public hearing. I think that's fair. And if we find that we can't get all that and be ready for August, I think that's okay too, because we're still leaning in on this.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, if we try our best, but we just can't get the, you know, the GU feedback, say,
Yeah.
you know, we'll have to nail them down to an August date and then be ready for September public hearing kind of thing. But I think it's not outside the realm of possibility that the third week of August, we could be ready for, you know, because I think textually, we will be ready for these things. It'll be the rest of it and the visuals and whatnot that we will be maybe still waiting on.
Sorry, and I don't mean this to sound pandering, but our new members contributed a lot and we got a lot done tonight. So
This
it
was
really, I'm
Awesome.
enthusiastic about, you know, getting something great out there. So I concur with all of the sentiment.
I have one, I'm sorry, Sue.
Could I make a suggestion that, I know for you too, like you said, where it's so much and so long, and if you put it down, what if we finish this part next Tuesday? And you only have to work on that, and then you can start sending that out to everybody, and we have a meeting in July at some time to do the parking. So that it's.
Yeah.
At
I'm
least,
thinking we might get through that and parking next week.
Let's see how far we can get next.
Right.
And we'll go from there, how about that? You
okay,
know, but we would definitely want to get through, get at least 2 parking.
Good.
we will
Right.
definitely get the
We
parking,
would definitely get the parking.
but I could. if we get through this Tuesday, then we can hand it to her, she can make whatever changes and forward it out. We can still get going on parking, but.
Yeah.
But at least get it started out.
I'll just make one point. I think we should, be clear about whether we're talking about going to a public hearing right away, or do we want to do a public meeting?
Also something to discuss.
Yeah.
Because one of the criticisms that we took was that we went into a public hearing where we were presenting our proposed amendment. And we didn't have readily available data, the public hadn't had a lot of time to soak it in, So what we talked about doing it differently this time was, a session where it's open and public and we distribute, and we have visuals and we say, this is what we're talking about, and when you got questions about that, well, that's what this means, and this is what setback is, and, kind of got a tutorial. That way there's some saturation time before we come to the meeting, the public hearing where we're saying, all right, say you're for or against it. And because half of the commenters were like, I don't really understand it, but I don't want my view blocked. I don't understand it, but, tell me the sewer is still gonna work if you add 100 new units, that kind of thing.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. And, so, maybe it's August, we have the public meeting, and then we go to the public hearing in September. And then, you're always, public hearings in the summer are always iffy because people are on vacation.
Yes.
So,
They're all going away.
We can also, we
So,
can also
yeah.
record,
Record the play, record the presentation and
put it on,
put it on Facebook or wherever.
Yeah, Facebook, link it so that, hey, we're
Yep.
gonna have a public hearing. And we just had a public meeting. You want to review the information session that we provided? Check it out here. Download this.
Newsletter.
I love it. I'd like to just get to the point where we have it and then we can start to socialize it, explain the rationale. That makes sense, you know what I mean? And we're very close. I don't mean to sound like we're not moving at a clip. I just like to, put a deadline on it and get to that point. But I think that's a great idea to communicate with the public about, like, this is why we thought this works. And then,
all right, that sounds like a plan. Is there a motion to adjourn?
So
All right, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions, okay, we're adjourned at 9:36.
Yeah.
9:36.
Okay. Recording is on?